It's determined behavior, but it's inexperienced behavior.
Well, I guess a question that I would have is, after looking at the ME's report and some of the things we've talked about at this point, if you had to, I don't want to say make a guess, but are you leaning towards one offender or multiple offenders?
There's two indicators here that there are multiple offenders. And one is the different widths of the knife wound and the multiple angles of entry. And the other is the wound on her buttocks and the wound on her thigh, which are in an upward direction, which to me indicates that she's either laying flat on her back and kicking up, or somebody's holding her around the arms and waist or chest and she's kicking up. So there's two potential indicators of multiple people. On the other hand, murder is not something that typically happens in numbers. And so you basically have to go with the weight of the evidence. And in general, I think people do this kind of attack. It's early in the morning. Whoever it was didn't have sufficient control over the victim. So that's really inept for one person. It's really, really inept for two people with two knives to not be able to control somebody. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So we have to look at what are the possible scenarios why multiple people would be attacking her. Because it's a bad neighborhood and they're trying to rip her off? Well, then why didn't they take the only valuable things on her body, her ring and her watch? Why go through all that and do nothing unless they're about to do that and the dogs alert and they run off? Let's just say, I mean, if you're talking about, I'm a bad guy, I got a knife, I want to kill somebody or I want to rip somebody off, are you going to do it at 7 a.m? Is that the right time to go out hunting for somebody?
Well, I was going to ask you about that, if the time of day told you anything about the offender, because it seems like such an odd time, and to me, unless it was a planned attack based on her routine.
Right. Well, it indicates that to me. I mean, because it is an odd time, unless there's always people walking around that area at 7 a.m. Is she the only one? She walks with other people sometimes, right?
She does, but it sounds like most of the time in the morning she was by herself, but we do have indication that there was at least one other person that had a typical routine of walking around about that time. But that's all we know for certain, is that there were two people that had that routine of that, 1 mile track around that school that would walk between 7 and 8 in the morning.
And, when she complained to her husband that somebody stopped and asking her if she wanted a ride, I mean, obviously that bothered her enough to mention it to him. It probably got her, the little hairs on the back of her neck standing up, and that's why she mentioned it to him. And we don't know, but that could be the impetus for her bringing that knife with her. That may have been something she just started to do recently, or it may have been something she'd been doing for a long time and she just never told her husband about it. But my feeling is that there are the probability. I don't believe in coincidences unless there's like absolute proof of them. And to me, the probability is that whoever was following her did this. And so that means that this is not just an impulsive act, but it shows just lack of experience. So even though it may have been a semi-planned event, it could be that the person who did it totally lacked maturity or had some kind of mental disorder. So that's why it goes down the way it goes down.
Yeah, I think a lot of that makes sense. All right, Jim. So now that you have analyzed all the documents and created your profile without knowing anything about any suspects, I'd like to run by a couple of scenarios, run them by you, and see how you think they relate to what you found on the crime scene. Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so scenario number one, we have a witness that came forward a couple of months later and said that, and I don't know if you have the aerial photo still there in front of you, but
let me get it. Okay, got it.
But the morning of the murder, somewhere shortly after 7 o'clock, we have a adult woman and her 13-year-old nephew were driving around the neighborhood looking for a family member. And they both said that they saw right on the corner of Grady and Apache, just east of Apache, so that'd be the northeast corner there, that they saw sounds like 3 to 4 men driving a white Camaro Z28 who were dragging a woman into a car while she was screaming.
Right. So let's back up a little bit. When did that occur?
So it occurred the morning of the murder, but they didn't come forward with the information until about 2 months later. Or actually, I think it was closer to 4 months later.
Well, all right, but let's just talk about that for a second, because one, they're eyewitnesses, which we all know are the least reliable source of information.
Right.
But the fact that it was months later, and the fact that they didn't find about the murder until months later, tells me that they might not have been talking about that same date. But it's still instructive, because it could have happened at exactly that place that they describe it in exactly the way they described it, but it just happened on a different day. It could have preceded the murder. It could have come after the murder, but that's less likely, I would think, because the people were probably on alert after that. But yeah, so that would be consistent with sort of a roving band of gang members or gang type members. Again, it sounds like that, if that's the case, is that ever reported? In other words, did anybody ever complain to the police that they got, that somebody's missing or somebody got abducted, or, where's the victim in that case?
Well, it sounds like, based on the investigative notes, that they did. So the woman who was driving had told her sister, according to the investigative notes, that day that it had happened. And then the next day, the sister called the witness and told her that they think that woman was murdered and she should call the police. And she just never did. And I don't know why. She passed away shortly thereafter, so we don't know why. And so we're left with a 13-year-old. She did write out an affidavit, but...
Well, what time did they say that happened?
They said it was shortly after 7 in the morning. Would have been right around the time of the murder. But, that depends on how much was their memory affected by knowing that the woman was killed at 7 in the morning.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, how would they know that?
Well, a day later, I guess it would be, it was in the newspaper, but it's, it's all trying to piece all this together through these notes.
Good.
And
right. But does it say in the paper the next day that she was murdered around 7 o'clock?
Yes, it does. Yep. We have that newspaper article.
Or does it say 7:30?
I would have to double check that, but I know that it did say that it gave the time she was pronounced dead, and that it happened around 7 o'clock when she would take her walk. All that information was in the Dallas Morning News the next morning.
Well, it is consistent with what we see. I mean, that would not be inconsistent with the victim having been dragged into the car and getting away, and then being tracked down to the place where she was actually killed.
Okay, and that's the big thing for you, because it's one of those, I'm just like you, where it was like, well, it's an eyewitness testimony. It seems shaky. But then it seemed like there were a few things that may corroborate it. For example, something I just noticed today was, I had in my notes that Kenneth, Keough's husband, had said that she told him that there was a white Cadillac following her around. But what I hadn't noticed till I reread the testimony today was that he said that she said it was a white Cadillac, but she doesn't know cars, so it might not have been a Cadillac. And it got me to thinking, could it have been a white Camaro?
Well, I mean, just the fact that it's a white vehicle. So let's look at the consistencies here. It's a white, American-made, big engine car, right?
Right.
I mean, could she have messed up Camaro and Cadillac? Absolutely. Starts with a C. So it's a white, American-made vehicle starting with a C. All right? So she could have gotten all those things right. Again, coincidences? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like too many coincidences.
Yeah. And I do believe that was remember when I said the risk factor was that she had such a regular schedule.
Right.
It means that somebody was driving around at that 7 o'clock hour on a previous day. So the fact that somebody would have done it again, I think that's totally consistent. I think that's a pretty high probability factor to look at. If I had thought that the body discovery location was the primary and sole crime scene, I would probably discount it. But I don't believe that it was the primary and sole crime scene. I do believe that this crime occurred over at least 2 different locations. And the fact that there are multiple directions from which she was stabbed tells me that it happened over time. It didn't all happen at once.
Yeah, and I agree. And so that's good to know, because that was the big thing for me, is like the stories sound a little fishy, but there's consistencies. And in your opinion, whether or not that's even a possibility that would fit the crime. And it sounds like it's at least a possibility.
Yes. And thing that you said to me that made it a little more credible is that her sister said that she reported it to her the next day and told her to call the police. So that, because that woman may have been killed. So there was some immediate contemporaneous corroboration of that.
Now, I
think the credibility goes up significantly because she reported it at the time. It was the 4-month delay that made me have the question in the first place.
Right. And that she never did really give an answer as to why she waited so long. I kind of wonder if it's not, she was a minority, and whether there was, fear of police or just avoidance of police that didn't want to get involved. So I don't know why she waited so long, but like you said, her sister did say she told her, you need to call the police, and she just waited months before she did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have another scenario I want to run by you and see what you think. So another report from witnesses, or not from a witness, but there was another report that it was a Crime Stoppers tip that a man, this guy's Caucasian guy, 6'2", really fit guy, muscular guy, had just gotten out of prison. He'd been in prison a couple of times, had quite a long rap sheet, who liked to jog around the school occasionally in the mornings. And as the story goes, this guy is going for a jog, comes across her and just grabs her and stabs her to death and runs away. Does that scenario fit to you with what we're seeing?
How old is he?
28 years old. And
he just got out of prison for what?
He had just gotten out of prison for assaulting a man and stabbing him. No. Excuse me. The first time he went in, he was in a bar fight. The guy pulled a knife on him, and he had stabbed the guy, I think, in the arm. Got out, was on parole, and then was trying to rob a drug house and got into an altercation and beat up a few guys outside of the drug house, and that put him away for 4.5 more years. And he had just gotten out about 8 months before this.
Well, to me, that guy, if he had confronted her and she was not cooperative, he would have punched her in the head and knocked her out and done whatever he wanted to her. That guy is not the guy that did what we see on this body. Okay, and I agree with you on that one, too. And then one more suspect that report there was reports of an unstable African-American gentleman, I believe in his 30s, that used to walk around the neighborhood talking to himself or walk around that same track. He's the one I was telling you about that had a consistent habit of walking about that same time. There were reports that he would talk to himself and that he had made rude comments to women when he went past them. As it turns out later, which I've now confirmed, he told police that he talks to himself because he was a minister and he would practice his sermons when he was walking around. But we still have this report of him making rude comments to women when he was walking past them. No reports of anybody seeing him do it, just that they saw him that morning out walking. And what is his criminal arrest history? None. Okay, and what is his mental health history? Has he ever been treated for mental issues or locked up for 72-hour evaluations or anything like that? None that I'm aware of. When the detectives interviewed him, he had wrote in his report that he did not seem mentally unstable at all. And I know that at this point in today, which is, 26 years later, he is the assistant pastor at a very large, he is the lead pastor at a very large church. So not that, being a pastor has one to do or another, but he's been successful in his career track. Right. So, yeah, it sounds to me like somebody was confused by the fact that he would talk to himself while he walked around. Obviously we've all seen homeless people do that, and it seems like they're insane, and some of them are, but it sounds like this guy had a legitimate reason for doing it. The fact that he had to practice repetitions of his speeches, I think that would be, a legitimate reason to be getting out in the morning and doing that. but how old